Hello and welcome to Speak Up, Listen Up, Follow Up, the podcast from the National Guardian's Office. In this series, we're exploring the role leaders play in fostering a healthy speaking up culture and making speaking up business as usual. In this, our fourth episode, Dr. Jayne Clark, National Guardian for the NHS, speaks to Andrea Sutcliffe CBE, Chief Executive and Registrar at the Nursing and Midwifery Council.
We've got to listen. I mean, all of the lessons of any of the reports that we've seen in recent times, it's
Conversation, Andrea comments upon the high number of speaking up cases within nursing and midwifery, and how the Nursing and Midwifery Council encourage people to speak up, but also how they are protected. We hope you enjoy this episode, and now over to Jayne.
Andrea, good morning, and thank you so much for joining me on the NGO podcast, Speak Up, Listen Up, Follow Up. It's a real privilege to have you here. And I wondered if I could kick off by just asking you what freedom to speak up means to you.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure to be with you, Jayne, and it's lovely to see you. And to talk about this subject, because I think it's absolutely essential for safe, kind and effective nursing and midwifery care to thrive. If people aren't confident to raise concerns, or they're not listened to when they do raise those concerns, if they raise concerns and then they're victimised because they do so, then problems are ignored, solutions are identified, improvement doesn't happen, and care suffers, and the people who we're here to support are the people who suffer as a consequence. So I think it's pretty fundamental, to be honest.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. And I totally agree with you. I was wondering, from a personal perspective, either in previous roles or, in your current role, have you had experience of either needing to speak up or having people speak up to you? And if so, what's that meant to you? What have you learned from that?
So it's happened in a variety of different ways, and probably what's most relevant for many people listening to this is when I was actually managing services. So we're actually going to bit of a way back now, but I do recall somebody raising a particular concern when I was managing services about the practice of a colleague and the impact of that practice on the people who were using those services. And I think that what I learned from that experience is kind of how difficult it is for people, particularly when there's an issue to do with professionalism between colleagues, and making sure that people do feel confident that they can do that. But also the importance of responding positively, because I think that in that particular circumstance, it took some time to really tackle what the issue was, and that was problematic for the individual who had raised the concerns, but actually problematic for the person who was affected as well. So I think that we're going a good 20 lessons that I learnt from that sit with me now, in terms of saying you've got to be able to listen, and you've got to be able to respond, and treat people with dignity and respect while you do that.
Yeah, that's such a powerful message, and such a powerful learning, because I think for me, similarly in the past, in previous roles, I've needed to speak up, and I understand the courage that it takes to speak up. And if things are then not acted on in the way in which you believe is necessary, or it's not explained as to why it's not acted on, then it just increases that vulnerability up. So I really resonate with that. Now, I just wonder if I can move on. Obviously, as a nurse myself, I am very aware, when I look at the data from the cases brought to Freedom to Speak Up Guardians, which of course is only one route of people being able to speak up in their organisations, but our data shows that around 30% of the cases, the highest number of any professional group, are from nurses and midwives. And I wondered why you thought that might be.
Well, and just have to say, Jayne, I'm absolutely delighted that as a nurse you are in this role, because I think that that's fantastic role modelling for the professionals on our register. But I think that there's two reasons I'd suggest. The first is that Nurses and midwives are the biggest professional group that spend the most time with people using services. So they are best placed to recognise the things that might create risk or cause harm or we should be addressing. And so I think that they absolutely are the eyes and ears of organisations on the ground in terms of identifying things. And then the second part of it is that it's a core part of the code of conduct. I mean, as you will know yourself, that we clear in that code of conduct, and I have it in front of me, act without delay if you believe that there is a risk to patient safety or public protection is a key element of our code. And so we expect it, frankly, and it is something that people should feel confident in doing, because they can use the code as a reference point to say, this is the reason why I have to. And one of the things that we've done over the last couple of years is create little animations called Caring with Confidence, which basically bring the code to life. And there was a sense which basically bring the code to life. And there was a specific one on speaking up. And if your listeners haven't looked at that yet, then I thoroughly recommend it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've looked at it. I've looked at those as a, looking at when I refresh my knowledge and understanding of you haven't undertaken the National Guardian Office's training in conjunction with Health Education England, the Speak Up, Follow Up, Listen Up, that you will do that to give you a greater understanding of the different routes that you can speak up. It's not just about speaking up to a Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, it's about speaking up to the relevant people in your organisation, and also speaking up externally if you need, speaking up to the relevant people in your organisation, and also speaking up externally if you need to, including obviously the Nursing and Midwifery Council if your nurse is listening, or other regulators and professional bodies like GMC or whoever. And that leads me on to my next question that I wanted to ask, actually, which was, because obviously different routes are available, and we know that as the regulatory body, it's very important that people will speak up to you. So I wondered how you ensure that when nurses and midwives do speak up to the NMC, that is acted upon.
Well, we have a very clear policy around all of that, Jayne, as I'm sure you would imagine, and that's available and visible and very accessible on our website, because we are a prescribed person in UK legislation in terms of people being able to speak up to us, which means that there are protections in law for the professionals who raise concerns with us. So people should feel very, very confident about that. And what our policy kind of sets out is that it guides what we will do in response. So we will assess whether it's something that we should be, it fits into the definition of whistleblowing. We will determine whether it's something that we can address as the regulator. More often, it's something that we would be needing to refer on to others. And we're very conscious of the issues around confidentiality as well. Obviously, I mean, that I think is very important, because very often if people are coming to us, it is because they're not feeling confident to be able to raise those concerns locally. And I'm glad that you mentioned the other regulators as well, because this is something that is common across all of the professional regulators, and we collectively produce an annual report about whistleblowing disclosures, and that is available on all of our websites. It's available on ours, and each of the professional regulators sets out what's come through, what we've done about it, and some of the learning that we've taken from it. So it is something that is very important to us all as professional regulators.
Yeah, it is so important, isn't it? And I think hopefully our listeners will be encouraged by hearing your organisation's approach to that, and understanding the approach of others. I think for me as well, when we talk about the number of nurses and midwives, and it's, as you say, because of the underpinning of the code, it is really, part expectation that if things at safety, patient care, and obviously the wider wider opportunities to improve services, it's important they speak up. What we see though, however, interesting in timings of the report yesterday from the equalities work, that actually people from minority ethnic backgrounds are less likely to speak up, and particularly in the lower paid roles, lower paid grades. And I just wonder, from the point of view of your organisation, or indeed your message to all organisations, what we can do to address that. Because whilst it's really good that 30% of the cases are false, I'm minded that there will be a proportion of people, not just nurses, but from minority ethnic backgrounds, who feel maybe more at risk of suffering detriment or adverse consequences of speaking up.
Absolutely. And we saw this, didn't we, at the beginning of the pandemic, when people from Black and other minority ethnic backgrounds were feeling very concerned about the lack of personal protective equipment, but actually not feeling able to raise that because they did indeed, as you quite rightly suggest, Jayne, fear that they were going to suffer detriment as a response. Again, I think there's two aspects of my response to this. So there's one, the fundamental things that we all should be doing, all organisations should be doing to respond. And then secondly, what can we do specifically for that group that may not feel confident to do that? So in terms of the basic message, we've got to listen. I mean, all of the lessons of any of the reports that we've seen in recent times, Ockenden around Shrewsbury and Telford, but most recently, but any of these reports, it's not listening. And so we first of all got to say we are listening. And we then have to be very clear that we will consider what we've heard so that we can act in terms of responding to it. So, don't ignore, don't assume, don't just kind of take things at face value, really consider, really look into it, and then don't avoid taking action. Those are the basic tenets, I think, of having a positive environment in which people can feel that they can raise those concerns, they will be listened to, they will. So that's the basic stuff. But then you have to think about, as you have highlighted, that there are particular groups, for whatever reason, whether they're from Black, Asian or minority ethnic backgrounds, whether they're gay, women in certain circumstances, whether they're gay, women in certain circumstances, low paid staff in other circumstances, that feel even more reluctant than others. So the key to that, I think, is making sure that leaders are creating a positive, index the contribution and values the contribution of everybody that is a part of their workforce. And from a nursing and midwifery point of view, our most recent registration data report, which we published in May, shows that nearly 25% of the register is from a Black or Asian or other minority ethnic background. So if we are kind of having a bit of a chilling effect on that group of people, because they don't feel that they can come forward, then we're losing nearly a quarter of the intelligence and the insight that we need to have to deliver great services. So you absolutely have to be making sure that that people are feeling confident, do feel that they're working in an inclusive environment. And there's so many things that we have to do on that. So, particularly around, obviously the NMC is a 4-country regulator, but your remit is in England. So talking about England, we've got the workforce race equality standards. We've got the insight that gives us about the disproportionate effect of disciplinaries and those sorts of things on people from these groups. And we've also got how how they're not getting promoted, and they're less likely than their white counterparts to end up in senior positions. So I think that some of those things, so it's different aspects of it, but some of those things, addressing those problems, identifying how we can actually enable people from different backgrounds to thrive in our health and social care services, really important, because then that gives people confidence to do the speaking up when they need to.
Absolutely, that's such a rounded answer, Andrea, and I'm sort of thinking what that's triggering in my mind is the fact that speaking up and speak up culture in organisations is indeed, I would say, excellent, management. If you don't have that, then I think we can fear for people who use services, for their safety, for worker well-being, for worker retention. So for all those reasons, but of course, speak up culture isn't just about the ability for someone to have a route to speak up. It's about, do they understand, do the managers, do the senior leaders have an understanding of those barriers that get in the way of people speaking up, and working on that wider inclusivity and diversity agenda. It's absolutely key, isn't it? And it's really good to hear you talk about that. I'm just wondering, in terms of your own staff at NMC, I know you have a freedom to speak up policy and you have guardians, so that your own staff are encouraged to speak up with things that get in the way of them doing their jobs. And I'm just wondering, how do you ensure, as the chief exec and as the registrar, how do you ensure with your board that absolutely that you're moving in the right direction with the behaviours and cultures that you want to see in other organisations as well as your own?
So, as you quite rightly say, Jayne, we have a policy, we have training and information for our managers and colleagues across the organisation, general awareness. We always kind of mark freedom to speak up before your time, but when National Gardening Office did the A to Z of Speak Up, we were N&M with Nursing and Midwifery. So we're there in terms of raising that awareness and trying to make sure that people understand it, and awareness and trying to make sure that people understand it. And our council members take a specific interest in this, but it sits with our audit committee, and we have two members of the audit committee, one lay, one registrant, who take a specific interest. Happens from a whistleblowing perspective within the organisation. So that is really, really important. And for me, it sits with our values. So our values are very, very. We did a lot of work when I first came into post about what our values should be, and I think freedom to speak up kind of sits with all of them. So it's about being fair, absolutely making sure that we're making evidence-based judgments about what we're doing and how we're doing it, and so responding fairly to what people have said. It's about being kind. It is about treating people with dignity and respect, understanding that they're bringing, and as you and I have already discussed, the courage that they need to kind of raise a concern if they've got that. It's about being collaborative, because very often when somebody is raising something, there's not just one person who's going to have to respond to that and sort it out. It is about working, from the highest level of the council members with the executive board, the management team, and the different teams within the organisation to respond to that. But it absolutely sits with our value of being ambitious, and that ambition is about being the best regulator that we can be, and ambition is about being the best regulator that we can be. And we will only, and we're not there yet. I really wouldn't want to suggest that at all. But we are only going to get to be the best regulator that we can be if we listen to the things that our colleagues are telling us that we can do, that we can improve, that we need to really do that.
Fair, kind, collaborative and ambitious. And doesn't that sum up that in just an amazing way, which brings us to almost the end of our time. But I could carry on talking with you about these matters for a long time, and I hope we get an opportunity to do again. But maybe I could close by asking you what your Speak Up pledge is, Andrea.
So it's that as a regulator and as an employer that I am personally committed and want to make sure that the council and the senior management team are committed to creating an environment that welcomes and responds to colleagues speaking up.
Thank you, Andrea, for your time. Thank you for your wisdom, and wish you all the best in continuing to lead the regulation of nurses and midwives. Thank you.
And thank you to you, Jayne, and good luck to you too.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for taking the time to come on our podcast. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Next time, Jayne will be joined by the Chair Designate of the North East London ICS, Marie Gabriel CBE.
We have to make sure that Freedom Speak Up is part of integrated teams where people are coming together from different organisations to deliver services to ensure that they're safe.
Make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode.